Okay, I think the way to raise the question of ontological, I think the way to raise the ontological question of what does it mean to be human, we need to be able to ask what are the boundaries that designate a person? Where does a person begin and where does a person end? What is the inline of a person and the outline of the world? Where's the inline of the self and the outline of others? How are we going to learn to draw those divisions? I think what many people do is they simply take sight itself as a kind of model for individually given things. I look around the world and I see other people, and when I see others, they always look like a figure against a background. If I have right here, I have a pen, I can see the pen because what the pen is not, and it sort of has this figure against the background. That's very different than the way I experience myself as having a body. My own body is more like those video games like Doom where you're just a perspective and you don't see the boundaries of the whole thing. Instead, your body, you don't see the discrete whole physical boundaries of your body in the way you do other objects or even other people. Instead, there's a kind of headlessness where the world rolls in a continuity outward from that headlessness. Now, I think the issue or the question is, to what extent do we make divisions between self and other that are ambiguous and overstated and basically relying upon the sense of sight, whereas if we only relied upon the other senses, we would say, maybe we're more connected than we realize in the visual world. Now let's just take many different examples. I think I've said in other videos, take breathing. Your breathing, you say, is something that you do, but actually it is a closed system. There's a larger environment around you, and so the division between your lungs and the air that you're breathing isn't as easy and clear as at first one would want to say. And much of this, you can't see it, it's invisible. You can't see the interconnection between the air and your lungs, and that's part of what makes it so baffling. Now take eating. Eating is very funny. If I ask you, are you the food you eat? There is a direct sense in which you could say you're not the food you eat. And yet, anything that you can't live without is definably partly you. That is, if you can't live without it, well, what is that? Well, that's part of how you maintain yourself. The problem of metabolism, when something becomes ingested, how what wasn't me becomes me, and then when it excretes me, it was me. When I excrete out, when I go to the bathroom, I pass off what wasn't me, became me, and now isn't me. There's ambiguities of the lines of self and non-self all the way along, and there's like semi-permeable membranes or boundaries. Take touch. Touch is itself a fascinating case. I think if you try to consider, really try to consider for a moment all of the ways that we touch others and are touched by others. If you try to imagine a world in which you would never ever be touched again, what would that world be? Most people, it's hard for them to realize, but they actually grew out of another person. That is, your first contacts were not of vision. They were contacts that began as touch and then grew through hearing, and eventually you could say you grew out of another person, and there is a way in which you continuously touched and nuzzled that particular other or another. Most of us, not everyone, but many people, they grew up climbing around on other people, continuously touching, suckling, hanging, holding hands, all kinds of ways of making physical contact. I think we like to pretend that we're just at the boundary of the skin and we're over here and they're over there. But part of the problem is that what made us who we are is all of the physical contact we've already had with others. If we try to right now in our imagination, imagine what we would be like had we not had any contact. We're missing that right now. We're formulating that with tools that were created partly by the rich social tapestry of touch and kinesthetic values. The different senses, the sense of touch, the sense of hearing, the sense of vision, they all give different spatiotemporal information, and they're all geared into sociality in different ways. We, for the most part, don't pay attention to that. And then what happens is, as people become more and more literate, the sense of vision gets dislocated from the rest of the functioning in the body. I mean, there's a rich history on what happens as abstract thought becomes possible in literate. And it's not necessarily people who read. It's partly that, but it's literacy starts to infect the culture broadly. Once that visual dominance, that visual bias comes to reign, many people use seeing as the basis for all knowledge. Knowledge itself becomes a kind of visual representation, and things that don't have boundaries just somehow don't count. And no matter how much, I mean, people could, let's try to argue about this. Try to give examples. Sound doesn't have boundaries. Where are the boundaries in between these words? As I'm speaking, where are the boundaries between you and me? We can see boundaries. When you see something is over in the distance, it's against you. But when you hear, to hear is have an intimacy with the thing here. Sounds separate from their sources, and they create a situation in which we find ourselves, especially words, right? Words are, they're socio-historical events, but they don't have boundaries in the way that a physical object has a boundary. Here we can see this, this object. Sounds are so different than that. I hope that, again, that adds to some of that. Thanks.